Hey everybody, this is Nico at Locofy. Today I'm going to be showing you how to export these Figma designs into production-ready front-end code so it's ready to integrate with your business logic right away using Locofy.ai. This is a tool that makes the process of exporting your Figma designs into code very fast and very simple using Locofy's built-in tools and working environments. I'm going to show you the whole process from getting the designs from a UI UX designer to configuring them with Locofy, and finally to exporting them into your GitHub repo so you can pull it into your local machine and start integrating it with your business logic. I'm going to show you the full process. This has worked for me, and I really hope it works for you. And I'm going to be very detailed so you get the full process and get this going on your own projects as fast as possible. So let's get started. So let's say you just got these designs from a UI UX designer and you're getting ready to set them up for Locofy and to export them into fully working code. Now, designs come in all shapes and sizes with different elements. We have frames, we have groups, we have rectangles, and the thing that you want the most are frames. And I'm going to teach you how to structure all of these designs. I'm going to show you how to think about a layout in order to make it as simple as possible so you prepare everything for the Locofy extension. Also, keep in mind that the structure of your Figma will be inherited by Locofy, meaning that all the file names and all the file nesting will be inherited by Locofy. So you want to keep it as simple as possible, and I'm going to show you how right now. So let's get started with layout design. I'm going to start outside in, and you'll see what I mean with that. And we're going to get started with the outer frame, and then structure things in smaller components, and then go to even the smaller components. So first of all, let's create the layout without touching these messages. And let's create this layout down here. So I'm going to create a frame down here that represents this. And in order to think about this correctly, you need to think what you want in terms of layout. So we want, let's say we want these messages on the left to be a fixed width, and we want this so that when it resizes, this grows with the screen, but this doesn't. Okay, and we're going to go later on to how to make this disappear so it looks like this, and this triggers the user messages as a nav. So here, this outer frame, I'm going to start by applying auto layout to it. And what we want are two frames inside of this. So one frame, and then another frame. I'm going to duplicate this frame. And I'm going to give them some color, so that you see the difference. Let's say this is the left, and this is the right. I'm gonna give it the same background. But we want this one to fill the container, and we want this one to be fixed. Now, as you see here, we're starting to create some sort of layout, because if I resize this, you can see the right side is resizing and the left isn't, which is exactly what we want. Now, there's a couple of stuff inside these containers. So this is the nav container, and this is the messages container. Let's call them that way. So first, we have messages. So I'm gonna give this text, call it messages. And this inner frame, we're gonna give it an auto layout. So as you can see, it became smaller because it fit the size of that messages text. But we're gonna resize that to here because the width is supposed to be fixed, and the height is going to fill. All right, then we're going to add some frames that represent the messages. So in here, I'm going to click F for frame, and I'm going to create a frame. And you see that I can't move that, so I'm going to give it a fill, and let's say it's a light blue message. Okay, and we actually want this to fill the container because we want something to contain all the messages. So let's say fill container. And we also want it to fill the container on the left and the right. Because once we get here, we want this to resize appropriately before reaching the big screen messages, size and display properties. So this messages, I actually want to reduce the paddings so it's clearer. And then we're going to apply more frames inside here. And we want to apply, and let's call this is a message that has auto layout. Apply some fill to it. There you go. And now this, we're going to select this frame that contains the messages and give it an auto layout as well. And it's automatically filling both ends. And then we're going to duplicate this. So as you can see, this resembles this. Now we can go deeper into this to create the layout for this as well. So it's we want these two to fill the container, so it's always pushing this thing to the right. So it's a frame, and then there's an image and another frame with auto layout, and this outer frame is going to fill the entire space. So let me show you how to do that. So we got a frame, which is the image, and we want this to fill the container. But this is our image. Let's give it a fill. Let's give it some light color, and let's adjust it so it's circular, so it looks like our image. Then we had some text, so I'm going to apply some text here. I'm going to give it some fill. This is our text, and then I'm going to duplicate that. And as you can see, it's automatically laying things out for us. So we want these two to have an auto layout, and then we're going to give this a column. And then we're going to remove the space between them. And then finally, I'm going to apply another frame to this, but we want these two things to have auto layout. So I'm going to frame them with Shift and A, and I'm going to make them fill container. But first, let me give this some color so you understand what's happening. So this is the time. This is our time. And this is going to fill the container. So this is our time, and let's make it a little bit smaller so you can see. And let's make this fill our container. And this is filling our container. And there you have it. Now, I'm not going to do this for all of them. All I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these, delete them, and I'm going to click Control and D to duplicate these. So this is where we created a similar, actually the same layout we want here. So let's go here. So what do we got here? We have some sort of header with the name. We have the message's content, and we have an input at the bottom. Okay, so that's actually pretty simple. We're going to create a frame here. I'm going to give it a fill that represents our header. Our text is going to be aligned to the left, so no worries on that. Then we're going to have our messages. And finally, we're going to have our input. Now, this should all be auto laid out. You see, as you can see, these are children. These are children of this container. So I'm going to apply auto layout to this. You see, not much changed. But then I want all of these to fill the container horizontally, and I just want the middle one to fill the container vertically. Meaning that if I adjust this outer frame, well, first we have to make this outer to fill the available space. So now, as you can see, this is responsive on Figma. Now let's add a couple more things. Let's add the layout for this, and especially this and this. So this is a name, and our name is inside this frame, and we can auto layout. Great, it automatically put it on the left. And here is the tricky part. Not too tricky. All you got to do is create one. Let's give it some fill so we understand what's happening. So this is our message. Make it a little bit smaller. This is our message container, and our actual message has to be inside of it. Now, let's do the contact first. So contact message goes to the left. Let's give it a fill. And then I'm going to duplicate this, but I'm going to push this to the right. Now, something interesting is going to happen. When we're going to apply auto layout to these things. As you can see, it's fitting the inner contents. Now, all we got to do is make this outer frame auto layout so that these inner frames can go to the full size. Now, I'm going to apply auto layout to this as well. and I'm going to fill the container, but this time I'm going to change the contents to the right. So now you have a structure similar to this. And now you can duplicate these things as if they were messages. And this should respond to the screen size. Finally, let's do the input. I actually want the input to be a little bit bigger. And this has an input that fills the space and this fixed item. So let's do that. I have an input that fills the space, and I have an input here. Let's add some fill to them so you can see them. Add some fill so that you can see them. And finally, let's apply auto layout to this and make this fill the container so that this responds, but this doesn't. Now check that out. We have a responsive design on Figma, and we haven't touched Locofy. So now that we have this layout structure, and as you can see, I focused only on the layout, not on naming, because we have names here. We're going to go ahead and Locofy this. This was an example to show you how to think about building layouts before actually going into the app. Of course, if you already know how to do this, you can skip this step, and you can go straight into Locofying this and applying auto layout. So this is responsive. And now we're going to move on to Locofy. And we're first going to do this with auto layout, and then we're going to go into Locofy to make it responsive. And finally, we're going to export the code, and so you can see it on your Next.js app. So let's get going. So now you have a clear picture of how to structure this layout. We're going to go ahead and start adding auto layout to this structure. And we're going to turn it into a responsive Figma design. And then we're going to use Locofy to add all the breakpoints in order to turn it into the mobile app as well. So let's get started. First, I'm going to select this container, and I'm going to check what has auto layout or not. If I apply auto layout, this does not look good. We have to first structure the two main containers. And it seems like we have the messages nav on the left created, but the right side doesn't have a frame around it. So we have this, and all of these are on their own. So I'm going to select the ones on the right. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to frame selection. This turns it into a frame, and we can call this messages container. So now we have two. We can apply auto layout without it messing up the designs too much. Now, if we resize this, obviously it's not going to be responsive. All we got to do is we got to turn this inner one into fill. Of course, all these items inside of it don't respond because they don't have auto layout, but we're going to get into that. But now we know that some auto layout is applied, and I'm actually going to remove this space between. Let's add 30, so it's not too much. But you see that we have a clear auto layout and a structure of two main containers, just like we had it at the start, which are these two gray ones. Then we're going to go in here, and if we apply auto layout straight up, it also works. You can play around with the margins to adjust them to what they were before, but we're going to go with what is happening right now. And to make this simpler, we have a bunch of conversations here, and we do have a container for conversations. I want to delete all of these contact cards and focus only on one. If you make one work, the rest will follow. And we want this to be responsive as well. And as you can see, this is not responsive yet. But this does have auto layout, and you can tell when you see these three little bars, and it's aligning things to the right. So we actually want to align things to the left. And this inner one, we actually wanted to fill the container. So now that we're resizing this, it is responding. Now, this is not responding. So we want this photo and this image and the name, we want this to fill container. And you see there's a space here. So sometimes it'll automatically put a space between them. And we want to get rid of that. So I'm going to say 0. So now this is responding almost appropriately. Finally, this is filling up the space, but this isn't. The name and the text, this also has auto layout. We want this to fill the container and go to the inner elements and fill the container as well, and fill container as well. So now if we resize this, Now, all we got to do now is duplicate this, and you got your text working. Now, let's go here. Now, here, you want these to fill the container. So you see there's a conversation container on the left. Let me make this smaller. On the messages container, there's a conversation container, and this doesn't have auto layout. And actually, the whole structure, the whole frame doesn't have auto layout. So let's add it. As you can see, it's separating things. So we want to remove that vertical spacing. You can do that here. Let's add 30 pixels space, and it's not filling, so let's make it fill. And finally, we want, because these two will be fixed, this one will fill the available space. So even though it's a frame and doesn't have auto layout, you can still fill the container because it's contained within an auto layout container. So as long as the outer element has auto layout on it, you can fill the available space of the inner frames, which are these. Now, we obviously want this to fill the container so that it replicates this. And now we want this to fill the container. Now, these are individual items. And this doesn't have auto layout. This is a frame. Let me make this smaller. So let's add auto layout to our conversations container. And if you see, it put them all in the middle. And we want to preserve the bubbles width, because if we go ahead and do this, this is not what we want. So how do we go about this? First, let's simplify it. I'm going to remove most of the messages, and I'm just going to keep two, the contact message and the user message. And now I'm going to right-click this conversation bubble and frame it. It's adding an outer frame to it, meaning that now we can expand it, or we can fill container with it, and this will keep its size. We're going to do the same thing here. So right-click, frame selection, and then we're going to fill the container. And of course, these two don't have auto layout, so let's add it. Add auto layout, and then click this frame and add auto layout, meaning that now on the second one, which is our chat message, we can align things to the right. So let's see if this is responsive now. As you can see, this is pretty responsive. Because this is fixed, it's reached the Figma limits, but we're going to handle this with Locofy. And finally, let's go to the input. Now our input doesn't have auto layout either, so let's add it. Not much changed. And let's fill the container with it. And then finally, let's fill the container with this input. And there you have it. And now you have a responsive messages. A responsive messages app. And if you export this right now to Locofy, it'll look exactly the same. And we're going to do that right now so you can see the first flow of getting things to work on Figma. And then we're going to export it to our Next.js app. So let's start the export process. The first thing we're going to do is open our Locofy extension, and we're going to select this frame and preview it. We haven't tagged anything yet. We're going to do that later. When we reach the limits of Figma, which are the breakpoints, we're going to start handling things with Locofy. But so far, we can just export this. And the way we export it, we just click View Code and View Code in Builder. We're going to ignore the recommendations for tagging because we know it's responsive here. It should be responsive on the builder and in our code. So now that the builder is open, we are going to see that we have our two containers, and our containers are going to have the frames that we created with auto layouts and the messages. And this seems like a pretty good structure, a pretty good file structure. So let's start handling some code. We have some recommendations from Locofy. We're going to use the auto components, which is going to recommend us, for example, this message card and all the instances, because they're exactly the same duplicated. We get all of them from one. So we're going to accept 9 instances, and we have our messages container. And it didn't recognize our individual messages, but we're going to get to that. So let's focus on the export first. So now let's view the prototype first to see that everything is as we want it to be. So it is. And we're going to export and deploy. We're going to push to GitHub. Our repo is named Locofy Messages. It only has the main branch so far. So existing repo, Locofy Messages. We're going to check out into a new branch. We're going to check out from main, and we're going to call this Locofy UI updates, confirm repo and branch. And it's going to give us a diff between the remote and the current that we're pushing, because there are some files that will be conflicting. For example, this index.js, all of this is going to change, and a new components folder is going to be created, which you see here. So let's resolve the conflicts. And here you can either accept GitHub changes, accept both changes, and accept Locofy changes. And then you can, when you accept changes, you can also modify anything down here. So I'm going to accept Locofy changes for everything because this is a new repo. So we're going to give priority to what Locofy wants to push. So we're going to accept Locofy changes for everything, keep accepting them, and we're going to complete merge and push. So our project has been successfully pushed to GitHub. If I refresh here, you can see that Locofy UI updates had recent pushes, and we see two branches, main and Locofy UI updates. So in our local repo, I'm going to close this to have more space. I'm going to do a git fetch. As you can see, it fetched the Locofy UI updates. So I'm going to git checkout Locofy UI updates, and I'm going to refresh this to see if there's changes. Now, these here are our changes from Figma. And this is responsive. Of course, there are some things that you could change to make this better looking, but this is what we originally wanted. Now, let's start changing things with Locofy to add the breakpoints so that when I reach a certain size, this will resize, this will disappear, and we will be able to toggle these messages from a hamburger menu, which we have on our Figma designs. And that's going to be right here. So let's get started with that. So now we're going to make this responsive for mobile when it reaches the breakpoints to turn it into something that looks like this. So that when we click this burger icon, it opens this messages drawer. The first thing I want to do is I want to open the Locofy extension. And we're going to make messages disappear when it reaches a certain breakpoint. So when it reaches, let's say, 960, because in 420 doesn't look good. So in 960, we're going to make this container disappear. So all we got to do is select that container. We're going to tag it as a container using Locofy. And on styling and layout on 960, we're going to make this disappear by clicking the hide property. So now it disappears when we reach that breakpoint. The second thing we want to do is want to grab that hamburger menu and put it into our app. So let's see. Conversation header does not have auto layout. So the first thing we're going to do is add auto layout to this. And we're going to put that icon inside. As you can see, it's aligned pretty much with Cameron, and we want it to be spaced out. But we don't even want to show it at first. So let's hide it so it doesn't appear. And we're going to open the Locofy plugin now. That icon is there, hidden. So what we're doing is, when this reaches 960, so let's tag this conversation header as a container. And then when it reaches 960, we want two things to happen. First, we want this vector, that is an image, to be shown on the 960 breakpoint. So show. And the other thing we want to do is we want to make this conversation header at 960. Instead of being packed, we want the content to be distributed. So let's preview this. So distributed just means space between. So when we open this up, it disappears, and when we close it in, it appears again. Awesome. So now I'm going to show you how to toggle a drawer using this button. So now we want this vector to be a button that toggles a drawer. So what we do is we go to image and we go to actions. And what we want on actions, as we see, we've selected the vector. And on actions, we want to toggle a drawer. And it says, sorry, there's no drawer found. So we're going to turn this into a drawer. We haven't tagged this as a drawer. So let's tag this as a drawer instead of a container. So I'm going to click drawer. And we want it to come in from the left. And that's pretty much it. And we're going to change the name to drawer messages. Great. So now when we find our vector, go to image, go to actions, toggle drawer. It gives us the option to find one. And if I click, drawer messages is there and it's done. So now when we open this up in our preview and we click this, our messages appear. Isn't that great? And as you can see, these are different messages. So make sure that this content is a copy of what's inside of this. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to paste it in there. And there you go. Of course, this screen doesn't have auto layout. So let's add auto layout to this. And let's fill the available space and fill the container. Make this a little bit bigger. And now let's preview again. Oops. Let's click this and preview. And there you have it. You now have messages as a drawer, and it's not there when this is responsive. Now let's push this to our code to complete the flow. In order to push this code, we're going to select this, but not only this, but also the drawer messages. I'm going to click Shift and I'm going to click it. I'm going to click View Code. As you can see, selected frames, 2 frames selected. I'm going to view code in Builder and it's going to sync them. Once this is synced, I'm going to view code in Builder. And we're going to view prototype. As you can see, messages is responding. If I click this, the drawer opens. And we're going to fix this available space issue later. But for now, let's export and deploy, push to GitHub. We're going to push to an existing repo or Locofy messages. And instead of picking new branch, we're going to pick existing branch. And we're going to select Locofy UI updates. We're going to confirm repo. And if you see, there aren't any conflicts because it's the same branch. And Locofy is basically merging the new stuff into the previous app. So all we got to do is push to GitHub. So it's not going to give us the diff screen. Our project has been pushed to GitHub. So now we have the same branch. And all we got to do is go here in our Locofy UI updates and do git pull. And we just got our updates. As you can see, on big screens, it looks like this. On smaller screens, it toggles the hamburger. And when we click the hamburger, it toggles the drawer. Isn't that great? So now we have a full flow from Locofy designs and responsive designs into our Next.js app and code. So now we're going to fix a couple of final things. One is this input that it's not actually an input. And the other thing is the height of this. We want the input to be at the bottom so that this content is spread around the page. Not only that, but we also want to make this fill the whole page. So let's get started. So in order to fix the height issue, let's preview the user messages main page with Locofy. And while it is responsive on the horizontal plane, it is not responsive vertically. So we want this to respond to the vertical space as well, so this input and this reaches all the way to the bottom. Now there's a quick fix for this. And we're going to make sure we're on the user messages page. We're going to tag this as a container in Locofy. We're going to move to styling and layout and scroll all the way down. And in advanced CSS properties, we're going to change the height to be. So now it is responding to the vertical space. The second thing we're going to do is fix this input element, which is, it's not an input. I cannot type on it. So I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to inspect this. And I quickly realize that this is a frame and it doesn't have auto layout applied to it, meaning that the children are not going to respond to they're not going to be able to fill the available space. So let's turn this into an auto layout. And then I'm going to click the text, select the text, and change it from hot to fill container. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Locofy, and with the text selected, I'm going to click input. And I'm not going to apply any UI libraries to that input. And now I can type here. So, and it is filling the available space. The other thing, I want to get rid of this outline. So with the input selected, go to styling, and in advanced CSS properties, we're gonna type outline none. So now outline. Yay. So that's basically all we wanted. So now with this ready, we're gonna select the frame. We're gonna click done. We're gonna click view code in builder. We're gonna open this in the code builder. We're gonna select the page and view prototype. And this is working as expected. And we're going to export and deploy, push to GitHub, to the existing Locofy messages branch, and confirm repo and branch. Finally, we push to GitHub. There shouldn't be any conflicts. And now we're going to just do git pull. Now we're going to refresh the page, and this is working. Awesome. So now it's up to you to add state to this branch and get a functional messaging app working. Let's check the whole thing. This is responding, and this is working. So that's the full flow from Figma to a Next.js app using Locofy. Hope you liked the video, and let us know if you have any questions on the Slack channel.